Welcome. I'm Richard Crenna. According to some accounts, 12,000 years ago, there was a civilization as advanced as any known today. It was called Atlantis. Then in a terrible day and night, its people and their entire continent were destroyed. Later cultures had to start once again from the beginning. Is the story of Atlantis only a myth? Or is it an historical account of actual events passed down through the centuries? Join us as we try to solve this great mystery, as we search for clues around the world. Our journey concentrates on 6 distinct locations, 6 intriguing destinations that all have one thing in common. They have all been called Atlantis. First, we explore a startling new theory. Recent discoveries have some people convinced that the treasures of Atlantis will be found here under 2 miles of polar ice. Then, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, there is an island paradise where only the tips of an enormous underwater landmass are still visible. Our divers explore the bottomless lakes and secret ocean tunnels that some believe are a real link to Atlantis. On a tiny cruise off the coast of Africa, we hear a strange story about an ancient people who barely escaped the destruction of their island homeland. Were they refugees from Atlantis? An ancient past that lead mysteriously into the sea. And in the Aegean Sea, ruins of an amazingly advanced civilization are being unearthed from tons of prehistoric rubble. And just offshore, our exclusive underwater coverage reveals what could be a new city buried beneath the waves. So stay with us. Each of these locations fills in its own piece of the Atlantis puzzle. Each has its believers and its debunkers, and each place leads one step closer, answering history's most enduring mystery. Where is Atlantis?
Coming up, from ancient inscriptions about a mysterious continent to Hollywood hype, is there one real story of Atlantis, and can it be found?
Evidence for Atlantis is all around us.
The search for evidence begins next on Atlantis, in search of a lost continent.
374-90042.
Account code.
963-400.
Fax.
697-367.
Are you sure this is the lost continent of Atlantis?
There's no doubt about it.
We're not human!
This is what happens when a very old legend is retold one time too many. Contrary to popular belief, the legend of Atlantis was not invented by Hollywood. It is a story that has been told and retold continuously since before recorded history in every corner of the globe. In North Africa, it is known as the legend of Atala. In France, Atlantica. Native Americans call it Azatlan. Mexicans, Aztlan. In ancient Hindu texts, the word catastrophe translates as Adyantika. These legends of great antiquity come from widely separated parts of the world that were not in communication with each other. Story of Atlantis.
Here's the scenario. A great advanced civilization is destroyed. There are only a few survivors. They have high scientific knowledge, but they settle amongst primitive peoples who do not have any of those attributes or abilities. With the means at hand, they set out to try to pass down to the future the tradition, the story, the knowledge of what happened to them.
If Hancock is right, there may have been a few survivors from Atlantis spreading their history and their advanced knowledge around the world. With their great knowledge, survivors from Atlantis would have known how to create the perfect pyramids of stone in the Egyptian desert, and the strikingly similar pyramids that have only recently been unearthed. Rising moon. Stonehenge is thought to be an enormous calendar, but it has always been a mystery how the ancient Druids knew enough about astronomy and physics to create it. Could an Atlantean have passed on advanced knowledge to these ancient priests? The Nazca lines are ancient drawings carved into the sandstone plateaus of southern Peru. They are visible only from the air. If the Atlanteans had mastered aerodynamics, then it would be perfectly logical for them to teach others how to create these giant signposts. If your civilization had been destroyed and you had been set adrift, what enormous SOS would you create to beckon passing ships and people to your land?
The search for Atlantis is a search for mankind's past. And in many ways, evidence for Atlantis is all around us and in various different places all around the world.
But where did these survivors come from? To prove there was an Atlantis, we must find physical evidence of the lost continent and expose its legendary treasures.
We know that there was a big landmass in the Atlantic Ocean, and we know in different parts of the world that the same civilizations seem to exist, radiating out like rays of the sun from Atlantis.
But the problem is that the search for the exact location of Atlantis has been like a 10,000-year-old game of telephone, each generation adding its own spin to the story.
As long as that monster lives, my undersea kingdom of Atlantis can have no peace.
It is the intersection of fact and fantasy that has made the search for Atlantis the domain of science fiction instead of science. Nothing illustrates this better than a story written more than 100 years ago. In 1882, a reporter for the New Orleans Daily Picayune heard that two steamship captains who had made numerous Atlantic crossings in the same well-mapped shipping lane had seen a mysterious volcanic island appear in the middle of charted waters, where no island had ever been before.
There's an island here!
It was a potentially explosive scientific discovery, a tantalizing clue in the search for the lost continent of Atlantis. But instead of notifying historians or oceanographers or geologists, the reporter took the story and embellished it beyond all recognition. He thought he knew what his readers wanted, and it wasn't science. The mysterious volcanic island had somehow become a giant landmass. Crew members from one ship were said to have actually landed on the island. They reportedly found mysterious artifacts and stole them. This story ran in the April Fool's Day edition of the paper, and any hint of the real scientific significance of the original sightings were lost forever in one newspaper's folly. To find Atlantis, we realized would mean stripping away centuries of misinformation. We had to find the earliest complete account of Atlantis. It was written down 2,300 years ago by the Greek philosopher Plato, who heard the story from his grandfather, who heard the story from the ancient sage Solon.
Solon got his information from an Egyptian priest, a priest of Sais in the Delta, who spoke of records stored in their temples going back more than 9,000 years before their time. And what those records said is that periodically a gigantic destruction visits the Earth, and when it does so, mankind is forced to begin again like children with no memory of what went before.
According to the story passed down to Plato, the lost continent of Atlantis had at its center 2 rings of land and 3 of sea, encircling its crowning jewel, the Temple of Poseidon. Greater than any dynasty before or since. They had created great monuments at a time when scientists claim humankind was barely emerging from the Stone Age. The residents of Atlantis had hot and cold running water, said to be remarkable in quality and capable of miraculous healing. The provided Atlanteans with abundant produce of every description and provided a home. Every family shared in the wealth of the great continents. But after many years of prosperity and great achievements in science and technology, rumblings deep beneath the earth signaled the beginning of the end. Ash and poisonous gases. There would have been time to flee their homes, but there might not have been time to get off the island. If for the cataclysmic finale to the magical continent of Atlantis. Plato's account of the rise and fall of Atlantis seems almost too fantastic to be true. But did you know that other places just as fantastic have already been found? 3,000 years ago, Homer wrote about the legendary city of Troy, a kingdom overtaken by Greeks bearing gifts. No one thought Troy was real, but in 1873, the maverick archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann found Troy, and it was a legend no more. This part of the Arabian Peninsula is so devoid of life, it's called the Empty Quarter. But legend has it that the Empty Quarter was once home to a fabulous city called Ubar, a place Lawrence of Arabia called the Atlantis of the Sands. And in just the past decade, satellite imaging from NASA has proved that Ubar is real. This is the outline of that city buried under the sand. And within the impenetrable jungles of Thailand, the mythical city of Angkor Wat was only a rumor until these pictures proved Angkor Wat was real. The pictures were taken from the space shuttle Atlantis, whose very name offers a promise of future discoveries. We have the high-tech tools necessary to find Atlantis. We have evidence that legendary cities can be real. Atlantis should be within our grasp, if only we could find a map where X marks the spot.
When we return, ancient maps lead to a startling new theory in the search for Atlantis.
There is a truly lost continent on our planet, and that is the continent of Antarctica.
Then, underwater discoveries lead us to the hidden treasures of a secret location in just 50 feet of water on Atlantis in search of a
Covered continent left to be found. But perhaps old maps could point the way to where Atlantis used to be. To us, they appear as mythical as the legendary continent itself.
Scholars have located Atlantis in just about every place you can imagine. From South America to Antarctica to islands in the Indian Ocean to Australia to North America to islands in the Aegean.
Among the many supposed maps of Atlantis are several which support the most far-out theory we explored in our search for the lost continent. This map, called the Kircher map, dates from the 17th century and correctly identifies the contours of a pre-Ice Age Antarctica. Curiously, Antarctica is labeled Insula Atlantis, Latin for the island of Atlantis.
These maps are a surviving fingerprint of the great lost civilization that some people call Atlantis.
Somehow these cartographers knew what Antarctica looked like 300 years before the invention of sonar, radar, or deep drilling. Was it a lucky guess, or did they hear about the continent from the descendants of people who had lived there when it was free of ice, and when it was called Atlantis?
The most famous of these maps was drawn by a Turkish admiral in 1513. His name was Piri Reis, and he stated on his map that he based it on more than 20 earlier source maps, some of which went back to before the time of Christ into ancient Egypt.
The Piri Reis map was discovered in 1953 by Professor Charles Hapgood, who used it to develop a controversial theory about the location of Atlantis. Hancock explains Hapgood's theory.
From time to time, the entire outer crust of the Earth can shift catastrophically in one piece over the body of the Earth, like the loose skin of a tangerine orange moving around the fruit.
According to Hapgood's theory, 12,000 years ago, North America was over the North Pole. Antarctica, or Atlantis, as Hapgood believed, was much closer to the equator, free of ice. Then the crust slipped, and all the continents shifted. Atlantis' final resting place was the South Pole. It's a theory that cost Hapgood his career and his reputation. Many scientists agree that the Earth's crust has slipped. But geologists like Professor Floyd McCoy of the University of Hawaii insist that this did not happen overnight.
In plate tectonics, that is one hunk of land that for the last, say, 200 million years has not moved very far. Ice shelves have been there for a long time. They've certainly been there for the last 40,000 years, intact.
Many mainstream geologists agree. The topography of Earth in the year 10,000 BC was almost identical to what it is today. So old maps don't seem to lead us there. We need more specific directions, and it seems Plato may have left those behind.
There was an island opposite the strait you call the Pillars of Hercules. An island larger than Libya and Asia combined. This is how Plato described the location of Atlantis, using real landmarks that would have been very familiar to his contemporaries.
I take Plato literally. I feel that where he says Atlantis is and the time frame is where Atlantis was and when it was. And that is in the Atlantic Ocean, beyond the Pillar of Hercules.
Most scholars believe that the Pillars of Hercules refers to the Strait of Gibraltar. Here, towering pillar-like rocks on either side of a narrow channel form a gateway between the old world of the Mediterranean and the great Atlantic Ocean beyond.
I would think that Atlantis can be found in the mid-Atlantic ridge around the Azores and is now really a sunken area of the mid-Atlantic.
Today, only the very tips of the mid-Atlantic ridge are still visible, and this is where Plato's words seem to lead us first, to the Azores. The Azores are 9 small islands, 1,000 miles west of the Portuguese mainland. The islands are volcanic, and there have been earthquakes here. The country also bears a striking resemblance to the idyllic paradise described by Plato.
When we look at the Azores, we see what is apparently the mountaintops of Atlantis. We have volcanic action. There are hot springs there.
Water from the Azores hot springs is piped into therapeutic baths. And just as in the story of Atlantis, people here believe the waters have mysterious healing properties. The lush landscape reveals an abundance of plants you wouldn't expect to find in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And just offshore, northern birds traveling south for the winter circle the same area but do not land, suggesting there used to be land here. There are eels from North America and Europe who swim thousands of miles from opposite shores to spawn here. But there is something missing in the Azores. There are no ancient ruins that point to the actual existence of an ancient civilization.
Why aren't we finding these megalithic cities of Atlantis and the Azores? Well, it's because they're all underwater.
So we brought underwater cameras might prove this undersea world was once home to more than just marine life. There were intriguing tunnels to follow, but they didn't lead to any evidence that a submerged city would be found here. It was easy to let the imagination run wild and see an ancient rampart in the ocean rock, or the arching doorway of an Atlantean palace. But there was nothing in this part of the Atlantic to prove the existence of Atlantis.
Just suppose that the United States was suddenly to be racked with earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and tidal waves, and that the whole country was destroyed, and then finally it sunk to the bottom of the ocean. In 11,000 years, do you think they would find an airplane or an automobile? Very unlikely, and they would probably conclude that America never existed.
Edgar Evans Casey believes that the Azores may very well be part of ancient Atlantis, but he is also very familiar with other Atlantean theories, because his father, the world-renowned psychic Edgar Casey, made several amazing predictions about the lost continent. Until his death in 1945, Edgar Casey was the world's premier psychic medium, paranormal investigator, and spiritual healer. Known as the father of holistic medicine, Casey built his reputation by curing seemingly incurable illnesses at his private hospital in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Edgar Casey was a firm believer in reincarnation. He claimed that the reason he had extraordinary psychic ability and healing power was because he could channel all the knowledge of his past lives, and he had lived one of those past lives in Atlantis. Known as the sleeping prophet, Casey would enter a trance state. He claimed to then be able to regress back to Atlantis and recall its wonders.
As this then was in that particular plane or sphere,
which...
Casey described in vivid detail his remembrances of Atlantean aircraft, machinery run by electricity, and their weapons of destruction.
That which in the present is termed the death ray or supercosmic ray, that will be found in the next 25 years.
The death ray Casey described had many of the same characteristics of modern lasers, or some say nuclear weaponry. And it was this that destroyed Atlantis. But if Atlantis had been the great hub of technology that Casey claimed to envision, why didn't that technology survive?
Well, I don't think it's difficult to think that technical civilizations have developed in the past. I mean, I can remember when there were no jet planes and no television and no computers and lasers, and that's in the last 50 to 100 years. So what could develop in 11,000 years is certainly, could be more than that. But a technical civilization is probably the easiest kind to destroy because it's based so much on people would know about an automobile, but most people couldn't build one if they were suddenly deprived of one.
Casey's psychic visions of a past life in Atlantis are beyond proof, and many people have doubted his veracity.
I'll admit it would be a lot easier if he'd never mentioned Atlantis, because it's some of the hardest stuff to believe in the readings.
And Casey might never have received any attention for his outrageous Atlantean visions if he had not made a series of startling predictions that all came true. He predicted the exact date for the end of World War II and the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Edgar Casey predicted that the western edge of Atlantis would begin to reappear near the island of Bimini in the Bahamas. He predicted the discovery would occur in 1968 or 69. And in fact, 23 years after Casey died, in 1968, divers found the apparent ruins of prehistoric walls and roads off the coast of Bimini.
When we return, an undersea excursion off the coast of Bimini, where interlocking slabs of stone may lead to Atlantis.
Oh, it's a road, all right.
The amazing Bimini discoveries and their connection to a buried city half a world away. Next on Atlantis, in search of a lost continent.
Seemingly prehistoric ruins of an ancient city found, as Edgar Casey predicted, off the coast of Bimini. Could this be the western edge of Atlantis? Bimini is a small group of islands, only 9 miles square in total. It is part of the Bahamas and lies just off the coast of Florida. Bimini is part of a large plateau that extends into the western Atlantic. The waters surrounding the islands are very shallow. In 1968, divers made a discovery that lends support to Edgar Casey's claim of a past life as an Atlantean. Off the coast of North Bimini Island, they found a 2,000-foot-long stretch of interlocking rock that has been interpreted as either a stone road or the tops of a submerged stone rampart, perhaps part of an Atlantean fort or castle.
Oh, it's a road, all right. It may be a stone pathway or the top of a wall. You can see that these stones are flat and they fit together. Something built these things. They weren't built by mermen and mermaids.
This is the type of architecture that's associated with Atlantis. Giant megalithic blocks, often of a jigsaw shape, perfectly fitted together.
The so-called Bimini Road may have all the earmarks of a man-made structure, but geologists are unimpressed. They have seen this kind of formation before.
That rock underwater is called beach rock. It occurs in any tropical area, and it breaks into square cuts. These are called joints in geology. They're natural joints. They're natural breaks in the rock.
There's strong opinions on both sides. Some people think that it's for sure a man-made formation. Some think that it's the natural formation of beach rock, which forms what look like pavements sometimes along the beach line there. But some parts look like at least the hand of man has had some intervention in it.
There is other evidence of human intervention to be found off the coast of North Bimini Island. There are barrel-shaped objects, which some researchers have suggested are stone pillars of Atlantean design. And there are indications of a mysterious civilization onshore as well.
One of the most exciting discoveries recently has been that in the swamps on the eastern side of Bimini, people have been flying in planes for years and noticed that there was a thing down there that looked like a fish. And indeed, it is shaped like a shark. In fact, it looks quite a bit like one of the local sharks in Bimini, but it's 500 feet long and 100 feet wide.
These inexplicable monuments, whose builders are unknown, may seem dubious to those seeking hard evidence of Atlantis, but they fit in perfectly with Edgar Cayce's original visions.
I'm sure there was more to Atlantis than Bimini. It may have been the western parts of Atlantis then, maybe the last parts that were remaining at the 10,000 BC period.
Even Cayce admits this is not all there is to Atlantis, and that there is no evidence of a great volcanic or seismic catastrophe on Bimini. To find ruins and a history of violent earth changes, we must travel to the eastern side of the Atlantic, to the Canary Islands. And it is here that we find another remarkable story that a people survived a global catastrophe. The Canary Islands are located just 60 miles off the northwest coast of Africa, in the southernmost section of the mid-Atlantic ridge.
The Canary Islands are another good island archipelago to look at in connection with Atlantis. They're in the right area. Also, the Canaries have very high mountain peaks there. There's volcanic activity and hot spring activity.
When Spanish explorers arrived here in the 1500s, they found towering mountain peaks, lush flora, exotic fauna, and a strange tribe of displaced people, perhaps the refugees of Atlantis. They are known as the Guanches. When conquistadors arrived on the Canaries, the Guanches communicated their surprise at finding that other people had escaped the great disaster which had sunk their homeland. They displayed stone tablets with a language they could no longer read. They hoped the explorers could decipher them, but the conquistadors were conquerors, not scholars. Like Atlantis itself, the existence of the massacred Guanches cannot be proven scientifically. But mysterious inscriptions in stone, perhaps of an ancient Atlantean language, do survive in the Canaries, and they remain undeciphered to this day. There are also circular stone foundations of an ancient civilization that may have existed here at the time of the conquistadors. Strangely, the Canary Islands are not the only place where these kinds of ruins have been found.
The Guanches assumed that their homeland had been destroyed and that they were the only survivors. But this may not be the case. Stone foundations and inscriptions matching those in the Canaries have been found here, 1,000 miles away from the Canaries, on the Mediterranean island of Malta. These temples are now believed to be the world's earliest freestanding stone structures.
And these Maltese ruins do show signs of a great catastrophe that provides an essential link to the location of Atlantis. According to David Childress, the Malta of today is quite different from the Malta of 12,000 years ago.
Malta, during the time of Atlantis, was not an island, but a plateau in this fertile valley of the Mediterranean. I think Malta is important in the evidence for Atlantis. The giant megalithic ruins at Malta are said to be some of the oldest in the world. The ruins of Gigantiga in Gozo are said to be the oldest ruins that we have so far found, and they're dating them back to 7,000, 8,000 BC. And this is getting us into that time frame of Plato's Atlantis.
Childress believes that the ruins on Malta once stood at the elevated center of a vast Mediterranean valley. Then a great deluge flooded the valley, leaving only the top of Malta above water.
The ruins show evidence of having had water deluge over them, and then became the island that it is today.
This prehistoric cave links Malta to Atlantis. Here, paleontologists have discovered the bones of exotic animals long extinct. They did not die in this cave. The bones were washed in during a flood. Among the animal bones found here are those of pygmy elephants, a creature not native to Malta, but described by Plato as living in Atlantis. And these mysterious cart paths provide another possible link to Atlantis. The rutted paths are ancient, and most surprising of all, the ruts do not lead to a town or a monument. They lead into the sea. If the Great Maltese Flood was possibly caused by the sinking of Atlantis, then we must be very close. But is there evidence of a great island in this area of the world that would match Plato's description?
Looking closer to his own home, there is an island in the Aegean with a history of cataclysmic volcanic activity. Could Atlantis have been in Plato's backyard?
Coming up, compelling evidence that Atlantis may never have been in the Atlantic.
This perhaps could be Atlantis.
And exclusive underwater footage revealing what may be the final piece in the great Atlantean puzzle. Next, on Atlantis, in search of a lost...
Elements of Plato's story come together. Is there any place on Earth where there's evidence that a cataclysm of water and fire destroyed an advanced civilization? Our worldwide search leads us to the ancient Greek island of Thera, also known as Santorini. We have also heard it called Atlantis.
Thera is a Greek island in the middle of the Aegean Sea. Thera is also the Greek word for fear, and it's an apt name. Because these tiny fingers of land were once part of a larger island that was blasted into oblivion during one of the world's worst natural disasters.
This blast was a huge blast. It was considered perhaps the fourth largest in the last 10,000 years. It was huge. It was 40 times what St. Helens was, as a guess. Well, twice Krakatoa. It was a big explosion.
An explosion large enough to destroy the island and create monumental tidal waves and historic floods, just as Plato described. But did it happen when Plato said it did, 9,000 years before Solon's visit to Egypt? The layers of ash, pumice, and rock left on the island tell the story of the disaster and allow geologists to date the event. It occurred 900, not 9,000 years before Solon's trip to Egypt. A difference of only 1 decimal point. A difference, some scholars say, that would have been quite possible because the ancient Greeks and the ancient Egyptians had different systems for telling time.
If we take the Greek calendar, 9,000 years means 9,000 years. If we take the Egyptian calendar, it may mean 900 years. It is the same with the Americans and the English. There is a difference between what a billion means to the Americans and what a billion means to the British.
What the British call a billion is what Americans call a trillion. So discrepancies in the numbering systems do exist to this day. So we know there was a disaster, and it could have occurred when Plato said it did. But isn't Thera in the wrong place? Shouldn't it be beyond the Strait of Gibraltar, not inside it?
Plato places Atlantis outside the Pillars of Hercules. Now, the Pillars of Hercules are the Gibraltar, but the Pillars of Hercules are also 2 caves in Peloponnesus. So question is, which did he mean?
Contarados believes Plato meant a pillar-like rock formation much closer to his homeland in Peloponnesus and very near Thera. But one sticky geographical description remains. Plato said Atlantis was larger than Asia and Libya combined. Could we have an incorrect translation?
One looks at the ancient texts, one finds, for instance, that Atlantis, according to Critias, was larger than both Asia and Africa. But the word Meson may have been misspelled after many copying of the text and may have meant Meson, which means in the middle of, rather than bigger than.
And Thera is in the middle of Asia and Africa. So now the location and the date and the disaster all coincide with Plato's description. But these rocky outcroppings look nothing like the fertile plains and 3-ringed city of Atlantis. At least not today they don't. But before the Great Eruption, this was not a water-filled crater. The view from here was of land, not sea.
In the late Bronze Age, it looked very different. In the late Bronze Age, that was an enormous volcanic island that sat up there. It was a volcanic island whose slopes came down and almost touched the cliff line around that island.
The volcanic island would have been extremely fertile, capable of sustaining vast farming terraces. Instead of the large bay that exists today, ancient Thera would have had only a small, sheltered harbor. Lower water levels could have exposed fingers of land, forming rings around an inner island. The geography could well have existed for the 3-ringed city surrounding the Temple of Poseidon that Plato describes.
There's a wonderful uniqueness in this setting for what has come out of rational science to now merge with this discussion, this description out of antiquity to say this perhaps could be Atlantis.
Could Thera really be the land of Atlantis? But where are the great temples, the modern city streets, the remains of the brilliant Atlanteans? Anything inside the crater would have been blasted to smithereens and flooded with water. So where do we look for more proof? These researchers are scanning below the surface of the remaining land.
And they're a meter apart? Yep, on 33. Make sure the antennas are on. All right, they're on. Okay. This is a ground-penetrating radar system. It's very similar to echo sounding in the sea, or perhaps even better to ultrasound, medical imaging, looking at babies, except in this case, we're actually trying to produce a picture of the Earth.
And the images that McGeary and McCoy have been getting are startling. Their sonographs reveal evidence that walls may be buried under this plain, reaching out perhaps for a square mile. Walls of an ancient city that may look remarkably like Plato's description of Atlantis. It seems likely, because across the ridge, archaeologists have already revealed a remarkable site. They have named the site Akrotiri. The findings here are so immense, it has taken nearly a quarter of a century to dig out just one city block. It is considered one of the greatest archaeological finds in history. And ironically, it was the falling ash from the volcano that destroyed the island that also preserved Akrotiri.
This falling pumice piled up like packing material, and it filled the interior rooms of the houses, then piled up on the rooftops.
As archaeologists remove the pumice, they are finding evidence of a civilization of astonishing sophistication. Many homes and businesses are 3 stories tall. This is a bath with 2 pipes emptying into it, presumably for hot and cold running water. Thousands of pieces of exquisite pottery are being excavated. And there is evidence of earthquake damage that occurred shortly before the final blast. But the most exciting discoveries of all are these perfectly preserved wall paintings. There are paintings that tell us what the people who lived here looked like. There are drawings to scale that depict how they got from place to place. There are anatomically accurate depictions of animals that do not exist on the island today, but are described by Plato as living on Atlantis.
The monkeys, the antelopes, again, do not belong to the Aegean fauna, but they are so realistically depicted that we are sure that the artists, they had seen these animals.
Together, these paintings perfectly describe what this island paradise was like before the Great Cataclysm. And it was almost exactly like Atlantis.
The value of these objects, besides their artistic value, is enormous because they are a great source of information. They depict daily activities of the people, both here and abroad. So they were peaceful people, enjoying life, living together with nature, side by side, and prospering through their daily activities.
The paintings are particularly important because they are the only record of a people who seem to have vanished off the face of the earth. In a quarter century of excavations, archaeologists have found no bodies, no bones, no valuables, no coins. Akrotiri was a ghost town when the volcano finally erupted.
They evacuated the city, but we do not know whether they evacuated the island. They may be found someday along the coast under the volcanic material, waiting for ships to rescue them.
It's a haunting image. Thousands of people, possibly Atlanteans, waiting to be rescued, but unable to outrun nature's fury. Could the people of Atlantis be buried just offshore, as Professor Dumas suggests? Are the treasures of Atlantis just waiting to be discovered under centuries of ash and sand?
When we return, exclusive footage the Greek government doesn't want you to see. We reveal what is buried here off the coast of Thera, next on Atlantis, in search of a lost continent.
In the search for Atlantis, all the essential details of Plato's story lead here to Thera, in the Aegean Sea. One town is already being excavated. Another, grander treasure trove of Atlantis may lie just offshore.
I think there are a lot of other sites that are extremely promising from an archaeological point of view. We have some evidence that indeed there are some underwater ruins of Akrotiri. So one has to start looking at those areas for possible finds.
There have been dives in the area, but there have been no pictures. Until now. The waters off the coast of Thera are off limits to cameras. This part of the world is littered with priceless debris from centuries of shipwrecks. But we're not here to strip precious artifacts from the bottom of the Aegean, but to search for clues to Atlantis. First, we found these enormous jars. Tantalizing, beautiful, priceless. Although probably not of the period of Atlantis. They are more than likely the remnants of ancient decayed shipwrecks, stacked one on top of another in what was once a harbor. The search continued, and suddenly something caught our eye. The first concrete evidence that a large city could be buried here. These stone blocks are the very tops of ancient stone walls that were buried in the same disaster that buried Akrotiri. 3,500 years of saltwater currents have eroded the stones and the joints between them. But the perfect triangle on this edifice indicates a human hand was at work here. This stone reveals a carved symbol, possibly part of a temple inscription. Ceramic pieces are strewn along the ocean floor. This shard is intriguing because one side is pale, while the other side is dark. The discoloration could have been caused by the intense heat of a volcanic eruption. Is this the top of a temple, or a palace, or a library? Is this Atlantis? Our journey has filled in many pieces of the Atlantean puzzle. From old maps of Antarctica to the mysteries of the Azores. From the intriguing Bimini Road in the west to a mysterious tribe in the east. From the oldest known temples in Malta to the ancient Akrotiri. But it is here, buried in an ash and pumice tomb, that the final pieces of the Atlantis mystery all fall into place. Embedded under the Aegean Sea is the place that Plato referenced, Atlantis. But the splendors buried here will not be available for us to see soon, until the Greek government allows archaeology into these waters, and they can use technology necessary to break through these hardened layers of time. Plato's Atlantis remains buried just as it has for centuries.
Tonight, the adventure begins